lucrative trade, so its science declined. But what this doesn't explain is why their scientific achievements have been so forgotten. And that's partly because as Europeans colonized great swathes of the Middle East and Asia, they actively encouraged the idea that the civilizations they encountered were moribund and in decline.
It seems the English and the French were uncomfortable with subjugating people whose knowledge and science may have been as sophisticated as their own. So it became important to portray the Islamic world in a very specific way. Namely that, yes, they once were very sophisticated and they had great scientists and philosophers, but of course now they've fallen into decay. Somehow, this point of view made the whole colonial enterprise seem much more palatable.
One of the most fascinating developments, I think, in the history of the encounter between Western Europeans and other cultures is a kind of shift which has got fundamental and terrible consequences amongst Western Europeans when they start to reflect on why they are superior. It doesn't often cross Western Europeans' minds that they might not be superior to everybody else. For a very long time, after all, Western Europeans in general, the British for example, supposed that their superiority lay in their religion. But then I think around the 1700s we begin to see a shift. And the shift is from claiming that the reason for European superiority is its religion to the reason for European superiority is its science and technology. Eventually it ends up with the famous phrase, we have the Gatling gun and they do not. Europeans in that period were quite prepared to acknowledge that in ancient times, Islam, for example, had achieved great things in the sciences, but they weren't doing so now. So even recent Islamic and Sanskrit astronomy was imagined to be very old, because if it was very old, it meant that the culture the British were conquering was declining. And for the British, that was clearly good news.
And some experts believe that the effect of this on Islamic scientific history is still felt in the Islamic world today.
The Islamic part and the Arab part have not yet discovered their history because their history was obliterated intentionally by the colonization period. And unfortunately, when they rediscover it now, they're rediscovering it in bits and pieces.
So today, for many different reasons, the great observatories of the medieval Islamic world are ruined husks. And it's true to say that most of the great scientific breakthroughs of the last 4 centuries have taken place in the West. But that's not to say that science has completely ground to a halt in the Islamic world. Now, in the 21st century, there are many examples of cutting-edge research being carried out.
Well, I've arrived at the Royan Institute here in Tehran, where they carry out stem cell research, infertility treatment, and cloning research.
I was surprised to learn that here in Iran, an Islamic state, potentially controversial science like genetic modification and cloning is condoned, even funded by a theocratic government.
One of the uses is when a small part of the heart stops working, which is finally going to lead to heart failure.
Right.
So the cells from that part of the heart are actually replaced with the cells that have been cloned. Another use of cloning in therapeutics is actually creating an animal which has the medicine in their milk, for example. So when we drink the milk, we actually receive the medicine we need.
Considering genetic research has many vociferous opponents in Christian communities, I was intrigued to see that here in Tehran, they have their own in-house imam to offer support and advice on this sometimes quite controversial research.
We have
got this medical ethic committee here in Royan Institute, and every project which is proposed is investigated in this committee, and we see different aspects of it, and they have got to justify the project for us.
I'm not enough of an expert in genetics to truly assess the quality of the work here, but one thing I can say is how at home I felt. Whatever cultural and political differences we have with the Iranian state, inside the walls of the lab, it was remarkably easy to find common ground with fellow scientists. Nature's rules are refreshingly free of human prejudice. That's something the scientists of the medieval Islamic world understood and articulated so well. In the 9th century, Al-Khwarizmi synthesized Greek and Indian ideas to create a new kind of mathematics, algebra. The polymath Ibn Sina brought together the world's traditions of healthcare into one book, contributing to the creation of the subject of medicine. In remote Iranian mountains, astronomers like Al-Tusi paved the way for scientists working hundreds of years later in Western Europe. These scientists' quest for truth, wherever it came from, was summed up by the 9th century philosopher Al-Kindi, who said, "It is fitting for us not to be ashamed of acknowledging truth and to assimilate it from whatever source it comes to us. There is nothing of higher value than truth itself. It never cheapens or abases he who seeks."
One moral emerges from this epic tale of the rise and fall of science in the Islamic world between the 9th and 15th centuries. And that is that science is the universal language of the human race. Decimal numbers are just as useful in India as they are in Spain. Star charts drawn up in Iran speak volumes to astronomers in Northern Europe. And Newton's Principia is just as true in Arabic as it is in Latin or English. What medieval Islamic scientists realized and articulated so brilliantly is that science is the common language of the human race. Man-made laws may vary from place to place, but nature's laws are true for all of us.
The science writer Ehsan Massoud